Let's be entirely honest with ourselves. The automotive market is flooded with illusions. Brands are wrapping cheap platforms in massive OLED screens and calling it premium.
But tonight,
We are tearing down a platform built with a completely different mindset. The Great Wall H10. GWM didn't build this to simply add another digital gadget to the highway. They built it because they had a point to prove. To survive the next decade of the EV transition, you cannot rely on software patches to fix lazy hardware. You need a structural, high-voltage baseline that can take a beating. The H10 is GWM throwing down the gauntlet. It's an aggressive mandate that says, we can out-engineer the West from the chassis up. Let's see if the blueprints back up the arrogance. Pop the hood, or rather, look directly at the subframes. This dual-motor layout isn't just about throwing raw horsepower at the wheels. Anyone can do that. It's about thermal endurance. Think about it. What happens when you push an electric powertrain to its absolute limit? It overheats. Efficiency drops off a cliff. GWM's answer is a ruthless, split-channel intelligent liquid cooling network. It isolates the thermal spike of the traction motors away from the generator. The mechanical synergy here is incredibly tight. There's no hesitation, just brutal, continuous, linear torque. That is not a marketing gimmick. That is pure thermodynamic discipline. Now, let's step inside. Because even an engineer-focused platform has to interact with the human element. But how does GWM approach cabin tech without falling into the cheap gimmick trap? They focused heavily on compute density, physical utility, and raw processing power. The centerpiece here is a massive, floating touchscreen matrix running the latest Coffee OS 3 architecture. It isn't powered by laggy, off-the-shelf chipsets. It utilizes a high-performance central computing framework that seamlessly integrates the vehicle's dynamic chassis sensors with the UI. When you switch drive modes or monitor the energy flow, the visualization is instantaneous. And look at the roofline. They integrated a roof-mounted LiDAR sensor right above the windshield. This links directly into their Coffee Pilot 3 autonomous driving system, feeding real-time spatial data into the cockpit for full-scene navigation on autopilot. But my personal analytical focus goes to the ergonomics and the center tunnel. GWM chose a minimalist layout, but they didn't get lazy. By moving the gear shifter to the steering column, they freed up massive real estate on the center console. Instead of forcing you to hunt through digital menus for basic operations, they left a dedicated block of physical toggles for essential climate controls and drive parameters. Right next to that, you get dual wireless charging pads and a genuine, built-in refrigerator tucked into the armrest. Even rear passengers get a ceiling-mounted entertainment screen. This is tech optimized for high-speed focus and premium comfort, not just digital showmanship. GWM understands that a true flagship SUV needs to feel smart, but it must remain functional when you are cruising at 120 kilometers per hour. Let's talk about the spine of this machine, the battery pack. GWM bypassed the old-school method of dropping a heavy battery box into a frame. Instead, they went full cell-to-chassis integration. This pack is the floor. It handles the structural load of the entire vehicle. But structural rigidity means absolutely nothing if the thermal management fails. Underneath those high-density cells sits a dedicated micro-channel cooling plate. When you plug into a high-voltage DC fast charger, the temperature variance between cells is strictly policed within a tiny 3-degree margin. And if a side impact occurs, the multi-chambered aluminum extrusions are designed to crush like an accordion, sacrificing themselves to protect the chemistry inside. It's calculated engineering, designed to prevent catastrophic thermal runaway. But none of this matters if the car drives like a wet sponge. And this is where I get excited. Look at this independent multi-link rear suspension geometry. Under heavy lateral load, when you are throwing 2+ tons of metal into a sharp apex, the kinematics take over. Instead of relying on aggressive electronic stability control to aggressively brake the wheels and kill your momentum, the hardware does the heavy lifting. The anti-squat and anti-dive geometry mechanically forces the tire contact patch to stay absolutely flat against the asphalt. Pair that with active dampers reading the road surface seamlessly, and you get a chassis that feels mechanical, predictable, and remarkably mature. So let's bring it all together. Is the Great Wall H10 a genuine mechanical triumph, or just another clever software illusion? My take: it's a massive wake-up call for the entire automotive industry. GWM has officially stopped hiding behind cheap digital gimmicks and started investing heavily in serious hardware maturity. When you look past the floating screens and the clean lines of the cabin tech, what you are left with is a highly sophisticated, robust foundation. They balanced the internal technology package with a real, deeply calculated mechanical backbone. They didn't compromise on the chassis kinematics just to budget for better software, and they didn't ignore the thermal limits of the high-voltage battery pack just to boast about raw horsepower numbers. When you prioritize structural integrity, thermal efficiency, and pure suspension geometry over flashy, unnecessary screen transitions, you build a platform that commands respect on the global stage. The H10 proves that Chinese automotive engineering has completely evolved. They aren't just catching up to the global elite anymore, they're starting to dictate the rules of the premium segment. Traditional luxury brands can no longer rely on their heritage or their badges to protect their market share. They need to look at the thermal management, the cell-to-chassis integration, and the raw engineering depth displayed right here. The legacy establishment should be paying very close attention. I'm Ava. This is the real blueprint. Drop your technical thoughts on these specifications below, and let's get into it in the comments.